Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be doing my final predictions for the 2022 United States Senate elections. Before I start, I'd like to say if you like my content, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. I know that this is the end of the cycle and that this is the end of my content coverage for the 2022 cycle before the elections, but I am going to be doing post-election coverage and I'm going to be working on 2023 and 2024 elections in the coming months, so stay tuned for that. Also, if you liked the video, leave a like and comment and tell me what your final predictions are, what you think I got right, and what you think I got wrong. With all that said, let's get into it. So I'm going to do what I always do and start off with the solid Democrat states, and those states are going to be the state of Oregon, California, Hawaii, Illinois. Even though some polls have shown this to be kind of close, I think it's still going to be solid Democrat. Same with New York. Obviously, Chuck Schumer is going to win by a pretty big margin here, but it might be closer than his normal elections, but that's still probably going to be above a 10-point victory in the state of New York. Same with Vermont, Connecticut, and Maryland. Moving on to the solid Republican states, we have the state of Idaho, the state of Utah. Even though some people think that this is going to be close, I am pretty sure that Mike Lee is going to win by a double-digit margin, so I am calling Utah solid Republican. But moving on from that, North Dakota, South Dakota, Kansas, both of Oklahoma's elections. Iowa, even though some polls have shown this to be close. If it does get within 10, that's because Chuck Grassley is old and that's affecting his voter base. That happens sometimes. It happened a couple decades ago when Strom Thurmond was reelected in South Carolina. Even though he usually won by huge margins, he won by a thinner margin due to his age, but I don't think that's going to happen here. I still think Chuck Grassley is going to win by over 10 points, so I'm keeping Iowa as solid Republican. Also, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Indiana, Kentucky, Alabama, South Carolina, Alaska, even though I think Murkowski is going to win here, and the state of Florida. Marco Rubio is a strong incumbent here. He won by like 7 in 2016. Val Demings is not really a strong candidate. I do think Rubio is going to win by over 10 points. So next, I'm going to do the likely Democrat states. We have 46 Republicans to start and 44 Democrats. So now the first likely Democrat state is going to be the state of Washington. Now, Washington usually is a pretty blue state, but in this election, it does seem like it could get a little bit closer. In the Real Clear Politics average, Murray is only up by 3 points. Personally, I do think that the polls are probably slightly underestimating her here because a lot of these places have never polled Washington before because this is the first semi-competitive race in Washington in years. But I do still think that this race is going to be under 10. I think that Murray's probably going to win by around 7 or so. So I am calling Washington likely Democrat. I think that this is a really long shot flip for Republicans, but if they are able to get Washington close, that means that they are probably going to sweep all of the toss-ups on election night. Moving on to the state of Colorado, which I am also filling in as likely Democrat. Michael Bennet is a strong incumbent here, and he's facing Joe O'Dea, who has been attacked by Trump because he attacked Trump. And so he does have problems with the Republican base here, and I think that a lot of them have kind of held their noses and decided to vote for O'Dea anyway, but it's definitely not going to be enough, especially in a state like Colorado, which is rapidly moving left, that has a Democrat incumbent. I think that Bennet is probably going to win by around 8 or so, so I am calling Colorado likely Democrat. All right, moving on to the likely Republican states, I'm going to start with the state of Ohio. J.D. Vance is leading here in polling by 5 points, which is actually kind of unheard of for Republicans because Donald Trump was never even leading by this much in the polls, and he ended up winning by 8 points both times. Applying the usual Ohio polling error to this race, Vance probably wins by over 10 points. Even in the 2018 midterm elections, in which polls were kind of a lot better for Democrats, Republicans were still underestimated in Ohio. Sherrod Brown did a lot worse than he was supposed to do, and Mike DeWine actually won when he was supposed to lose. In the last couple weeks, J.D. Vance has expanded his lead a lot in the polling. I just said he was up by around 5, but he was up by only 2 to 3. I think Vance is probably going to win easily here. I could see it being a solid Republican state, but I am going to call it likely Republican. I think it'll fall just short of a 10-point victory for Vance. The next likely Republican state is going to be the state of Wisconsin. Ron Johnson has been leading polling here, which he has actually basically never done in the polling aggregate in 2010 or 2016. Now he's leading the polls going into his election in 2022. I think he's definitely going to win here. He usually overperforms the polls by several points. We all understand that in the state of Wisconsin, Republicans are consistently underestimated, except in 2018 when polls were actually kind of spot on in the governor's race, but even then, the polls were not consistent. They either had Walker up or they had Evers up, and it ultimately averaged out to be pretty accurate, but the polls were all over the place in 2018. In 2022, the polls seem to be more consistent. They show a Johnson +2 to Johnson +5 victory. And with the polling error in Wisconsin, even in the more accurate and reputable polls, Johnson is probably going to win by 6 or 7 points when all the undecideds break. So I am calling Wisconsin likely Republican. So those are all of the likely states for each party and solid states. So going into the toss-ups, we have Republicans starting at 48 seats and Democrats starting at 46. So I'm going to work through all of these toss-ups going east or west to east, starting with the state of Nevada. Now, the state of Nevada very clearly is favoring Republicans in 2022. In the Real Clear Politics polling average, Laxalt is at 47% and Masto is below 45%, which is actually horrendous for an incumbent Democrat in Nevada 2 days before the election. She is probably going to lose. There's still somewhere between 7 and 8% undecided in these polls too, which are definitely going to break for Laxalt because that's just how midterm election years work when you have a Democratic president. And like I said in my governor video, a lot of people justify saying that Laxalt and Lombardo will underperform the polls because usually Republicans are overestimated in Nevada, but that wasn't the case in 2020, and I don't think that's going to be the case in 2022. I think people have learned how to poll Nevada, and Emerson, which is one of the only polls that did not overestimate Republicans in the past, has Laxalt up by 5 points here. And I don't really think that Laxalt is going to win by 5 points, and Emerson has overestimated Republicans by like less than a point. I think he's probably going to win by around 3 points, so I am calling Nevada lean Republican. Moving on to the state of Arizona, Blake Masters has caught up in the polls here. Now Kelly only leads by 1 point on the Real Clear Politics average, and Emerson actually had Blake Masters leading by a fraction of a point in their final poll. Applying the 2020 polling error to this race, I believe that Masters is ahead already, but applying past Arizona polling errors, which actually have overestimated Republicans, we could see that Kelly is probably still favored here. However, I don't think that polls are going to overestimate Republicans here again. I think they're probably pretty accurate here. But Kelly is still only ahead by 1 point with 4 to 5% undecided, and a lot of those undecided or other probably went to Mark Victor, who was the Libertarian candidate who dropped out and endorsed Blake Masters, and I do think that's going to help him a little bit, but in an election as close as this, that could mean a lot. I'll be honest, this is probably my least confident call I'm going to make on this entire map, but I do think Blake Masters is very narrowly going to win in Arizona just when undecideds break and when Mark Victor's voters decide to flock to him, probably by an 80-20 margin. I could definitely see Mark Kelly winning. I do think Blake Masters is narrowly favored, and he led a poll finally. I think he's going to win by the tightest of margins, but I really am not going to be surprised if Mark Kelly wins here. So moving east to the state of Georgia, we have Herschel Walker versus incumbent Democrat Raphael Warnock. Polls here have been going back and forth for the last couple of weeks. Walker is currently ahead by the slimmest of margins, and of course, in midterm years, the undecideds are going to break for Republicans. However, I do think that this is going to go to a runoff. I think if it avoids a runoff, Herschel Walker probably wins. I don't see Warnock getting ahead without a runoff, and I don't really see Warnock doing that well in a runoff, especially if Republicans take the Senate, which, spoiler alert, they are going to. We still have North Carolina here, and Republicans are already at 50, but I do think Herschel Walker is going to lead in the first round. It's going to go to a runoff, and then I think he probably will narrowly lead in the runoff. I just think Democrats are going to be demotivated after they lose the Senate and probably won't get out to vote here. I think Herschel Walker will probably win by a very narrow margin in Georgia, so I am calling it tilt Republican. All right, moving on to the state of North Carolina. I actually hinted at this when I was talking about Georgia, but I do think Ted Budd's going to win by a pretty decent margin here. He's leading in the polls by about 5 points right now. He's actually been surging recently. I could even see this race being likely Republican, and a lot of places do have it likely Republican, but North Carolina's trends are kind of trending away from the GOP. We saw it swing left in 2020 despite states like Florida shifting right. Compared to the national environment, North Carolina was actually almost identical in 2020 compared to where it was in 2016. So it's possible that the trends aren't entirely against the GOP. I do think that Budd is probably going to win by a little over 5 points, so I am calling North Carolina lean Republican. Moving up to Pennsylvania, obviously this is Oz versus Fetterman, and after that very painful to watch debate performance between Oz and Fetterman, Oz has taken the lead in the polls. On RCP, he's very narrowly leading by 0.1% right now, but that is because a Marist poll having Fetterman up 6 is in the average, and obviously Fetterman is not going to win this race by 6, so Oz is probably actually up by more than 0.1. And as we know, polls in Pennsylvania don't really tend to overestimate or underestimate Democrats. They tend to overestimate Democrats. And Oz is already leading here. I think Oz is probably going to win by a little more than 2 points. So I am calling Pennsylvania lean Republican. Fetterman's campaign really did just fall apart after he had his stroke, and the debate did not help. This isn't even necessarily Fetterman's fault that he's losing this race, but I do think he's going to lose mainly because of his health problems, and Oz's attacks on crime have been good. He's mostly stayed away from attacking him on the actual health issues themselves and kind of let them speak for himself, and I think that was a good reflection of Oz. So I do think he's going to win this race by a little more than 2 points. I'm calling it lean Republican. Finally, we have the state of New Hampshire. In my past videos, I said that Don Bolduc was too much of a war hawk to win in New Hampshire because he was down in the polls by several points, and there was also a late primary here, which tends to help the incumbent party. But in the recent weeks, Don Bolduc has actually caught up to Maggie Hassan, and at one point he was actually narrowly leading the Real Clear Politics average. Right now he's behind by less than a point. I think this race is going to be very close. One of the most accurate New Hampshire pollsters, St. Anselm, actually had Bolduc leading by 1 point, and they actually narrowly underestimated Biden in 2020. However, Emerson has Hassan up 4, and Insider Advantage, which is a Republican pollster, has Hassan up 1, but Trafalgar has Bolduc up 1. So this is very clearly going to be a narrow election. I do still think Maggie Hassan is favored very narrowly. New Hampshire is just a blue state now. She has the incumbency advantage. And I could definitely see this one flipping, but right now I do think that Maggie Hassan is a very narrow favorite, so I am going to call New Hampshire tilt Democrat. So here we have it, the final 2022 Senate prediction on the 2022 Election Trackers channel. I have Republicans holding everything they have, including Pennsylvania with Oz, and I have them picking up Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia. And this is the last video that I'm going to upload before the election. It's been quite the ride here, but I am encouraging you guys to subscribe still because I'm going to be doing coverage of the results. And if there's a runoff in Georgia, I'll be covering those. And there are elections in 2023 and obviously leading up to 2024 that I do intend on covering. So if you liked my content this cycle, subscribe to the channel, like my videos, and comment on my video telling me what you think I got wrong, what you think I got right, and all that. Thank you guys so much for watching this video and watching my channel for the last couple months. Have a great day and happy election day.